do you think that when you die, you become something more or something less? Because it kind of feels like when we're researching paranormal that we're dealing with fractions of a consciousness or tragic experiences or something like that. I mean, are we shattered and spread to the wind of the light, or are we ourselves only somewhere else? You know, you got a take on that? Of course, you don't have an answer, but maybe a take.
Yeah. Well, like I always say, everything that I say is an opinion. I'm not an expert. I'm just somebody who has a lot more experience in this field than most people. I never portray myself as the end all be all. And with that, I'm going to talk about this. We can go back to, let's say, Thomas Edison. He was a brilliant man who was actually an early ITC researcher. His view on the soul and consciousness was when it broke up, when we die, it broke up into hundreds of millions of particles. And he called the reassembling of these particles swarms. So that was his particular viewpoint. And I'll come back to that in a second. When we die, our consciousness doesn't die. That is the whole premise of ITC, that consciousness continues to exist after death. There is life after death, and it's consciousness. It's not a physical form. With consciousness, it travels to another dimension. It's not in this physical realm that we're here in today. I personally believe, and obviously this is not fact, that our physical selves are a receiver of consciousness. Consciousness does not come from here, does not come from the brain, it does not come from the heart. We basically are getting information from our conscious selves, which is not physically with us. It's in another dimension. And basically the information that we are receiving is coming from this particular realm. And there are examples of that for,
like we're avatars.
Exactly. Perfect phrase. And there are these aha moments that have happened throughout history. Like a great one's Nikola Tesla. He one day struck out of the blue with the whole image of free energy. It just popped into his head. Consciousness downloaded it into him. So he fell to his knees on the Jersey beach, drew it in the sand with a stick so he could visualize it and not forget what he had just been enlightened with. Ghost boxes happened the same way. Frank Sumption, the man who created them, he had a dream where it was just impacted into his brain from another consciousness. It said, build this circuit to communicate with us. So our consciousness, we are downloading consciousness at all points in time. What happens when we die is the physical body is just severed from that. When we dream at night, our consciousness has free reign. So when you can take this out a step further, think of mediumship. What's happening with trance mediumship, where a consciousness overtakes the body. Think of remote viewing, where you're projecting your consciousness to another planet or another part of the world. Your consciousness is actually seeing it. Out-of-body experiences, your consciousness physically leaves the body and goes out and experiences things while your body is just a shell. So we have all of these things that have been shown ad nauseum that our consciousness is not physically here. So it goes to the other side. What that other side is, we don't know. Is it a giant source? Is it a pool of swarms? We don't know. What makes me kind of lead more towards the swarm side is that there is a theory in possessions where, once again, you have a consciousness overtaking another consciousness, where there are pieces of consciousness that can kind of glom onto you, and it gets carried through. And there are actually psychologists, like former psychologists, Edith Fiore and others, who have developed techniques to remove these little bits of consciousness that are attached to you. It's not a full consciousness, it's just a fragment, a light swarm of consciousness that lingers with you. And we all have these things. So consciousness is much bigger than what we think, and it could be much smaller than what we think. The only thing that I'm confident of is that consciousness does not reside in our physical form. It is nothing more than an avatar.